On a quiet evening in a small, snow-covered town, Mildred, an elderly woman, sat in her cozy living room, knitting by the fire. She loved the peace and calm of her home, nestled on the edge of town, far from the noise of the busy streets. It was winter, and the snowflakes outside were falling thicker and faster, making the world outside look like a winter wonderland. The soft glow of the fireplace flickered in the dim light, and Mildred smiled to herself, enjoying the warmth. She had lived here for many years, finding comfort in the simplicity of life. Mildred often looked out the window, watching the snow blanket the town, knowing that this time of year could be challenging for many. She worried about the travelers passing through the area, especially those who might not have a warm place to stay. As the storm outside raged on, she couldn't help but wonder if there was anyone out there stranded in the snow, needing help. It was during one of these moments of concern that the sound of motorcycles revving reached her ears. At first, she thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but the rumble grew louder, and soon she saw the headlights of several bikes cutting through the dark snowstorm. She squinted her eyes, unsure of who would be out in this weather. The snow had already piled up to several feet, and the roads were dangerous. It wasn't a night for anyone to be on the road, especially not on a motorcycle. She stepped closer to the window, her heart racing with concern. The motorcycle slowed as they approached her house. She could make out the shapes of the riders. There were at least a dozen of them, all dressed in black leather jackets, helmets, and bandanas. They looked tough, the kind of people you might expect to see in a gang, not out in the middle of a snowstorm. Her first thought was to turn them away, but something about their exhausted faces made her hesitate. The bikes came to a stop in front of her house, and the riders dismounted, shaking off the snow from their jackets and helmets. Mildred took a deep breath and opened the door, her heart racing. She had seen enough of the world to know that the sight of these men might be a bit intimidating, but she also knew that everyone deserved kindness, no matter their appearance. "Hello," she called out gently, her voice a soft contrast to the harsh winds outside. One of the men, tall and broad-shouldered, approached her. He looked down at her with dark, tired eyes, his face hidden behind his beard. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her as if he wasn't sure how to ask. But then he spoke, his voice rough but polite. "Ma'am, we've been caught in the storm. Our bikes broke down a few miles back, and we need a place to rest for the night. Is there any chance you could help us out?" he asked. Mildred's heart softened as she looked at the group. There were at least 15 of them, all standing in the snow, looking cold and exhausted. Their bikes were parked haphazardly, snow already covering them, and some of the men were shivering from the cold. Despite their tough exterior, they looked vulnerable in that moment. "Of course," Mildred said, stepping aside to let them in. "Come on in, all of you. You're welcome here. The storm's not going to let up anytime soon." The men exchanged surprised glances. They had expected resistance, but Mildred had greeted them with a warmth they hadn't anticipated. They stepped into the warmth of her home, shaking off the snow from their boots and looking around curiously. Mildred gestured to the fire, inviting them to sit. "Thank you, ma'am," one of them said, his voice filled with gratitude. Mildred smiled warmly as she closed the door behind them. "No need to thank me. Everyone needs help now and then, especially in a storm like this." She set about making hot coffee, offering it to the men as they settled by the fire. The warmth of the room began to thaw their frozen fingers and faces. As they sipped their coffee, the mood lightened. They started to talk, telling Mildred about their journey. Some of the men were quiet at first, but the warmth and safety of the room helped them open up. They shared stories about the places they had been, the people they had met, and the freedom they found on the open road. Their lives were filled with adventure, but also with challenges. The road wasn't always kind, and neither was society. They often faced suspicion and judgment, simply because of the way they looked. Mildred listened carefully, her eyes kind and understanding. She had always believed that people were more than their appearances. As the evening wore on, the bikers seemed to relax, no longer as guarded as they had been when they first arrived. They laughed, swapped stories, and joked with each other, their tough exteriors softening in the warmth of her home. One man, a bit older than the rest, leaned forward with a smile. "You know, we don't often get kindness like this. Most people look at us like we're trouble. But you didn't even flinch when we showed up. You just opened your door. That's something special." Mildred chuckled softly. "I've learned that it's not the outside that matters, but the heart. You're all just people, like anyone else, just trying to make it through life. You're welcome here as long as you need." The bikers nodded, some of them touched by her words. They had faced so much in their lives, and this simple act of kindness meant more to them than Mildred could have ever known. As the night grew late, they began to settle down, some of them lying on the floor, others sitting in chairs. Mildred offered them blankets, making sure they were comfortable. She had lived a long life and had seen many things, but she had never once turned away someone in need. The storm outside raged on, the winds howling, but inside Mildred's house, it was warm and peaceful. She couldn't have known it at the time, but this small act of kindness would soon lead to something much bigger. As the bikers drifted off to sleep, Mildred sat by the fire, reflecting on the night's events. She knew she had done the right thing, but she had no idea how much of an impact it would have. The next day, when the snow had stopped falling, the bikers would leave, but not without a promise to return the favor. And though she didn't expect anything in return, Mildred had unknowingly formed an unbreakable bond with these men, one that would change her life in ways she never could have imagined. The morning light filtered through the snow-covered windows, casting a soft glow over the room. Mildred woke up early, as she always did, to start the day. She quietly moved around the house, her slippers softly padding on the wooden floor. The house felt peaceful, with the quiet hum of the storm finally fading outside. The fire from the night before had burned down to embers, still offering warmth, but the house had a calm silence to it. She peeked out the window and saw the snow had finally stopped falling. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine winter landscape. The trees were heavy with snow, and everything was still and quiet, like the world had been paused for just a moment. Mildred smiled to herself, thinking about the bikers who had arrived in the middle of the night. She could hear them stirring in the next room, some still asleep, while others had begun to rise. As Mildred started preparing breakfast, she thought about how the night had gone. The bikers had seemed so rough and hardened at first, but as they spent the night under her roof, they had shown a different side. They had shared their stories, laughed, and enjoyed her company. Mildred could tell that they weren't just the tough, intimidating people others might have assumed them to be. They were kind in their own way, just a group of people looking for warmth and safety, just like anyone else. After a while, one by one, the bikers began to gather in the living room. They were a bit quieter now, clearly tired from the long journey and the storm they had just endured. Mildred had made them a simple breakfast of hot pancakes, eggs, and strong coffee. It wasn't much, but it was the least she could do for them after they had spent the night under her roof. She placed the food on the table, and they sat down to eat. The man who had spoken to her the most the night before, the one who had asked for help, sat across from her. He looked at her with grateful eyes. "You've really saved us, you know," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "We were stuck out there with nowhere to go. We've faced a lot of storms on the road, but nothing like this. And you just opened your door to us without a second thought." Mildred shrugged and smiled. "It wasn't much. I just did what anyone would do if they had the chance." The rest of the bikers nodded in agreement. One of them, a younger man with a tattoo on his arm, spoke up, "I've been in a lot of places, but never have I seen someone be this kind to us. Most people look at us like we're trouble, just because of what we ride and how we look. But you just treated us like regular people. Mildred's heart swelled with warmth at the compliment. She didn't think of them as anything different. Everyone, no matter who they were, deserved kindness and respect. That was just how she had been raised. And after all these years, she had learned that there was no reason to treat anyone differently based on their appearance or reputation. Everyone had their own story, and everyone needed a little help now and then. As breakfast continued, the bikers slowly began to share more about their lives. One by one, they opened up, telling Mildred about their travels, their families, and the challenges they faced. Some had children they hadn't seen in years, others had left families behind to chase the freedom of the open road. Mildred listened attentively, offering gentle words of encouragement. She knew what it was like to feel alone or misunderstood. After they finished eating, the group began to gather their things. They knew they had to leave soon, as the snow would be melting and the roads would be opening up again. The bikers stood up, stretching their stiff limbs from a night spent on the floor and couches. Mildred noticed that, despite their rough appearance, they moved with care. They had been kind enough to leave her home just as they had found it, with no signs of the chaos she might have expected. There were no traces of their overnight stay, no mess to clean up. She appreciated that. As the bikers began to head towards the door, the tall man who had spoken to her the night before turned to her once more. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Here," he said, handing it to Mildred. "It's not much, but we wanted to thank you for your kindness. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call us. We'll be there." Mildred took the envelope, but she didn't open it right away. She looked at the man with a warm smile. "You've already done more than enough. You've shown me more kindness than I could have ever imagined. I just wanted to help." The bikers smiled, some nodding in agreement. "We'll remember this," one of them said, his voice gruff but sincere. "You're one of the good ones." Mildred nodded, holding the envelope in her hand. She hadn't expected anything in return. She had simply done what she felt was right. As the last biker stepped outside and started their bike, the others followed. One by one, their motorcycles roared to life, breaking the quiet of the morning. The snow had melted, and the sun was shining down on the small town, but Mildred knew this was just the beginning of something special. The group of bikers began to pull away, their motorcycles kicking up snow as they rode off into the distance. Mildred stood on her porch, watching them disappear down the road. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what she had done, even if it seemed like such a small gesture. She had offered them shelter, food, and kindness, and that's all that mattered to her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something more had happened that morning. There was a connection, an unspoken bond between her and the bikers, one that would stay with her long after they had gone. She didn't know it yet, but this simple act of kindness would soon lead to something bigger than she could have imagined. As the day went on, Mildred returned to her usual routine, tending to her garden and making sure the house was in order. But the warmth from the bikers' visit stayed with her. She had always believed that the world was a place for kindness, but now she knew just how powerful that kindness could be. And though she didn't expect anything in return, she felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had made a difference in their lives. Little did she know, this small act of kindness would ripple through her town in ways she never expected. It wasn't the last time she would see those bikers. And it wasn't the last time her life would be changed by the power of kindness. The days that followed seemed to pass by like any other for Mildred. She went about her daily routine, tending to her garden, baking bread, and keeping her home warm and cozy. The memory of the bikers was still fresh in her mind, but she hadn't expected anything to come of it. It had been a simple act of kindness, one that she had done many times in her life. She never sought recognition or reward, helping others was just the way she lived. But as the days went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Every time she walked outside, she found herself looking down the road, almost expecting to see the familiar sight of motorcycles pulling into her driveway. But nothing ever came. The bikers had left, as they had promised, and her life returned to its usual rhythm. However, as the weeks passed, Mildred began to notice something strange. First, it was a bike that passed by her house, slowly. The rider, a tall man with a beard, gave a nod of acknowledgement as he rode past. Mildred smiled and waved, unsure if he recognized her from that night. Then, a few days later, she saw another bike. And then another. At first, it was just a few riders, but soon she began to see more and more motorcycles on her street. One afternoon, as she was sitting on her porch sipping tea, she saw a familiar face approaching. It was the tall man, the one who had spoken to her the most the night they stayed. He was riding alone this time, but his face was still kind, his eyes full of gratitude. As he pulled up to the driveway, he stopped and dismounted from his bike. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice warm and respectful. "I just wanted to check on you, make sure you're doing all right after that storm." Mildred smiled, feeling a rush of happiness at the sight of him. "I'm doing well, thank you. And I'm glad to see you're all right as well." The man nodded, his gaze shifting toward the other bikes parked down the road. "We all are," he said, his voice quiet. "We wanted to make sure you were okay, too." Mildred was puzzled. "What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, his smile growing wider. "Well, after that night, something changed for all of us. You were kind to us, and we're not used to that. We wanted to show our gratitude in a way that meant something. So, every time we pass through, we've been stopping by to check on you." Mildred's eyes widened. "That's very sweet of you, but you really don't have to do that." He chuckled softly. "We know, but it's important. You took us in when we had nothing, when no one else would. We haven't forgotten that." Mildred's heart warmed at his words. She hadn't expected this kind of return for her simple act of kindness. The man lingered for a moment longer before giving her a friendly nod and walking back to his bike. "You'll see more of us around, ma'am," he said. "We just wanted you to know that you've made a lasting impression on us." As he rode away, Mildred stood there, speechless. She hadn't realized how much her actions had affected them. She never expected a return, but here it was a group of people who, in their own way, wanted to show their thanks. The days passed, and soon Mildred found herself looking forward to the sight of motorcycles coming down her street. At first, there were just a few bikes, stopping occasionally, but then, it seemed like every few days, more and more would show up. Sometimes they would stop and say hello, sometimes just a wave, but they never failed to acknowledge her kindness. She was slowly becoming a part of their lives, and in turn, they were becoming a part of hers. One morning, when she stepped outside to collect her mail, she found something unusual. In the middle of her front lawn, there was a large, heavy box. It was wrapped with a plain brown paper and had a note attached to it. Mildred approached it cautiously, wondering what it could be. She bent down and picked up the note, her heart skipping a beat when she saw what it said: "For Mildred, from the Brothers of the Road." She carefully opened the box, her curiosity piqued. Inside, she found several things: a thick, woolen blanket to keep her warm during the colder months, a set of beautifully hand-carved wooden figurines, and a large basket filled with fresh food, fruits, bread, eggs, and even a few jars of homemade preserves. The note, attached to the top of the basket, read, "We've been thinking of you, Mildred. You gave us warmth when we needed it most. Now, we want to make sure you're always taken care of." Tears welled up in Mildred's eyes as she stood there, holding the basket close to her chest. She hadn't expected anything like this. It was beyond anything she could have imagined. The bikers had taken the time to think of her, to send her something that would show their appreciation for her kindness. The simple gesture touched her deeply, more than words could express. The next day, she found herself sitting on her porch, staring at the basket and the beautiful wooden carvings. It was a quiet moment, but it felt significant, like the beginning of something much bigger. The bikers had become more than just a group of strangers who needed help in a storm. They had become a part of her community, and she was a part of theirs. And then, just when Mildred thought things had settled down, the unexpected happened. The following week, she heard the unmistakable sound of motorcycles rumbling down her street. She stepped outside, smiling to herself, knowing it was them again. But this time, it wasn't just a few bikes. It was more than she had ever seen before. At least 50 bikes, lining up along the road, their engines roaring in unison. The riders began to dismount, one by one. They were all wearing leather jackets, their faces familiar to Mildred. They had come, not as a few bikers, but as a show of respect. They had come to honor the woman who had shown them kindness when no one else would. The bikes lined up, row after row, parked neatly along her street. Mildred stood on her porch, speechless, as one of the bikers approached. It was the tall man again, the one who had spoken to her the most. "We've come to thank you properly," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "This is for you, Mildred." He handed her a large, beautifully decorated banner, one that read, "Thank you, Mildred. From the Brothers of the Road." The rest of the bikers stood behind him, nodding in agreement. Mildred's heart swelled with emotion. She never expected anything like this. She had only opened her door to them in their time of need, and now, they were giving back in ways she couldn't have imagined. The impact of her simple act of kindness had spread, reaching far beyond her expectations. The bikers had returned, not only to thank her but to show her that she had made a lasting impact on their lives. And in return, Mildred realized that they had changed her life too, showing her the power of kindness and the unexpected connections that could form when people simply opened their hearts. The days after the bikers' visit were a blur for Mildred. She felt like her life had shifted in ways she couldn't fully understand. For so long, her days had been peaceful and solitary, filled with the routine of tending to her garden and the quiet rhythm of her home. But now, everything had changed. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the presence of something larger than herself, something connected to the community she had unknowingly become a part of. The motorcycles had become a familiar sound, something that she actually looked forward to. It wasn't the noise or the rumble of the engines that brought her comfort, but the thought that the bikers cared enough to stop by. Slowly but surely, the bond between Mildred and the group of Hell's Angels was growing stronger. It wasn't just about the kindness she had shown them during the storm. It was about something deeper: respect, loyalty, and a shared understanding that transcended their different walks of life. One afternoon, as Mildred sat on her porch, sipping a cup of tea, she saw a familiar figure walking toward her house. It was the tall man again, the one who had spoken the most during their stay. He had a gentle smile on his face as he approached, his leather jacket gleaming in the sunlight. "Good afternoon, Mildred," he said, his voice calm and kind. "How are you today?" Mildred smiled back, pleased to see him. "I'm doing well, thank you. What brings you here today?" The man chuckled softly, looking around at the peaceful surroundings. "We've been talking, all of us. We wanted to come by and check on you again. We've got something special for you." Mildred raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "Something special? You really don't need to do anything more for me. You've already done enough." He smiled warmly, shaking his head. "It's not just about what you did for us. It's about what you've done for the whole town, Mildred. You've shown us that there's still good in the world, that kindness can change everything. We wanted to show you that we appreciate you, in a way that you can see." Mildred didn't fully understand what he meant, but before she could ask, the sound of engines filled the air again. This time, it was a larger group than ever before, at least 50 motorcycles, their engines roaring as they lined up along the street. They parked one by one, creating a colorful parade of leather and chrome. Mildred stood up in awe, not expecting such a display. The man, who had introduced himself as Jack, motioned for Mildred to follow him. As she walked toward the bikes, she saw that the other bikers were gathered in front of her house, smiling and chatting with each other. They looked at her with a mixture of respect and affection, something she had never quite experienced before. Jack turned to her. "This is for you, Mildred," he said. "We want to show you how much you mean to us, and how much we've come to respect you." Before Mildred could say anything, the bikers began to unload things from the back of their bikes. There were bags of fresh vegetables, boxes of fruit, and large bags filled with various supplies. Mildred looked on in surprise as they began to stack the items neatly on her porch. "We know you love gardening," Jack continued, "so we brought you some of the best seeds, the ones we know will grow in this weather. We also brought some fresh produce for you. We wanted to make sure you have everything you need, and then some." Mildred was speechless. She had never imagined that a group of bikers would go so far out of their way to show their gratitude. She had expected a small token of thanks, but this was more than she could ever have hoped for. Jack placed a large, handmade sign in front of her house. The sign read, "To the woman who opened her door with kindness, from the Brothers of the Road." It was a simple message, but one that carried more meaning than any words could express. "Thank you, all of you," Mildred said, her voice filled with emotion. "This is too much, but I am so grateful. You didn't have to do any of this." One of the bikers, a man with a large beard and a friendly smile, stepped forward. "We know you don't want anything in return, Mildred. But you've done something that no one else has. You've shown us that there's still kindness in the world, and that means more to us than you could ever know. This is just our way of saying thank you." The group spent the afternoon with Mildred, chatting and laughing as they helped her arrange the vegetables and seeds in her garden. It was a peaceful moment, one that would forever remain in Mildred's memory. She had never expected to form such a strong connection with a group of people she had only met once. Yet, here they were, treating her like family. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, the bikers started to say their goodbyes. One by one, they mounted their bikes and revved their engines, ready to continue their journey. Mildred stood on her porch, waving at them with a full heart. "Take care of yourselves out there," she called out to them. Jack, who had become the closest of the group to her, turned back to look at her with a smile. "You'll see us again, Mildred. We're family now. We'll always take care of each other." And with that, the group rode off, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the distance. Mildred stood on her porch for a while, looking at the empty street, the warmth of their presence still lingering in her heart. She had opened her door to them out of simple kindness, and in return, they had shown her the power of that kindness. In the days that followed, the small town began to notice a change. The bikers, who had once been feared or misunderstood by many, were now seen in a new light. People began to see them for who they truly were, a group of loyal, respectful individuals who cared deeply for the people they met along the way. They didn't just show up when they needed something, they came back to offer support, to show kindness, and to pay it forward. Mildred's life had changed, too. She had always been kind, but she now understood how much of an impact one simple act of kindness could have. She never expected to become part of a larger community, one that transcended appearances and stereotypes. But through her actions, she had forged bonds that would last a lifetime. And as she tended to her garden, planting the seeds the bikers had brought her, she knew that kindness, like the flowers she planted, had the power to grow and spread, bringing new life and meaning into the world. The weeks that followed were unlike any Mildred had experienced before. Life had always been simple for her, filled with the familiar rhythms of her daily routine, but now there was a new energy in the air. The bikers, the Hells Angels who had once seemed like strangers, had become a part of her life in ways she could never have imagined. She often found herself looking out the window, waiting for the familiar sight of their motorcycles, but at the same time, she never expected them to show up. Yet, they did. And each time, it brought a new sense of connection, a deeper bond that she had come to cherish. One morning, as Mildred was preparing breakfast in her kitchen, she heard the unmistakable sound of motorcycles approaching. Her heart skipped a beat, a smile forming on her lips before she even saw them. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door, eager to greet her friends. As she stepped outside, she saw the familiar group of bikers, now a regular presence in her life. They were more than just a group of riders, they had become part of her extended family, a group of people who showed up not because they needed anything, but because they cared. "Good morning, Mildred," Jack called out as he dismounted from his bike, his usual warm smile lighting up his face. "We thought we'd stop by to check on you again." Mildred chuckled softly, feeling a familiar warmth in her chest. "It's always a pleasure to see you, Jack," she said. "And all of you, too." The bikers parked their motorcycles neatly along the side of the street, the sound of engines echoing off the quiet houses. Mildred couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had never expected this deep connection with a group of people who were so different from her in many ways. But what connected them was something simple: kindness, respect, and the understanding that no matter where you came from, you deserved to be treated with dignity. As the bikers gathered on her front lawn, Mildred invited them inside for coffee. They always enjoyed her company, and she appreciated the camaraderie that had developed between them over time. The men, who had once been hardened by the road, had softened around her, opening up in ways they hadn't with anyone else. They shared stories of their travels, the places they had been, and the people they had met along the way. Mildred listened with interest, always fascinated by their adventures and the lessons they had learned from living such a free, unpredictable life. But it wasn't just the bikers who had changed. The town, too, had started to shift its perspective. Mildred's neighbors, who had once looked at the bikers with suspicion, now saw them in a different light. They noticed the way the bikers treated Mildred, the respect they showed her, and how they helped out whenever they could. Some of the townspeople even began to approach Mildred, asking about her new friends. And with each conversation, the walls between them and the bikers slowly came down. One afternoon, as Mildred was tending to her garden, a neighbor from down the street, Mrs. Peterson, stopped by. Mrs. Peterson was an elderly woman who lived alone and had always been a little reserved. She had never been one to socialize much, but recently, she had started to open up to Mildred. "Mildred," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice cautious but kind, "I've been meaning to ask you something. I see the bikers come by every now and then, and I've noticed how much they respect you. I have to admit, I was a bit wary at first, but they seem like good people. Is that really the case?" Mildred smiled softly, wiping the dirt from her hands. She had been asked similar questions by others, and each time, she answered the same way. "Yes, Mrs. Peterson, they are good people. They may look rough on the outside, but they've shown me nothing but kindness. They've become a part of my life in a way I never expected. They've helped me with things around the house, brought me food, and most importantly, they've shown me a kind of respect that's rare to find these days." Mrs. Peterson nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I can see that. I've noticed how they've helped you with your garden and always seem to be so respectful when they're around. It's just hard to look past their appearance sometimes. But I guess, just like you said, everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are." Mildred nodded, knowing exactly what Mrs. Peterson meant. It had been hard for her, too, at first, to see beyond the bikers' tough exteriors. But now, she had learned that appearances could be deceiving. Underneath those leather jackets and tattoos, they were just people, just like her, with their own struggles, dreams, and stories. Over time, more and more of the town began to see the bikers in the same way. They stopped judging them based on their looks or reputation and started to appreciate them for the people they were. The bikers didn't ask for anything in return for their help or their kindness. They didn't need to. They simply showed up when they were needed and left when their work was done. But the impact they had on the town and on Mildred was far greater than they could have known. As the months passed, the bond between Mildred and the bikers only grew stronger. They came by often, not just to check on her, but to visit, share a meal, or help with various tasks around the house. Mildred had become a second mother to many of them, and they, in turn, had become her extended family. The laughter and conversations they shared on her porch became a regular part of her life. And for the first time in years, Mildred felt like her life had a sense of purpose that went beyond the quiet comfort she had once enjoyed. One day, as the summer sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Mildred sat on her porch, sipping iced tea and watching the bikers work together to set up a small party in her backyard. They had decided to throw a thank you celebration in her honor, a way of showing their appreciation for everything she had done for them. The town was invited, and for the first time, Mildred could see how the bikers had truly become a part of her community. As people arrived, there were no longer fearful glances or uneasy whispers. Everyone had come to understand that the bikers were not the troublemakers they had once been perceived as, but rather a group of people who cared deeply for those around them. The party was a success, with laughter, music, and good food filling the air. Mildred sat surrounded by her neighbors and the bikers, feeling a deep sense of joy and belonging. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to something so beautiful and life-changing. As the night wore on and the stars twinkled above, Mildred looked around at the faces of the people she had come to love. She realized that the kindness she had shown in one small moment had rippled out in ways she never could have imagined. It had brought people together, bridged divides, and created lasting connections.